Hey, I'm ZSH Plays, welcome back to San Bernardino Zoo. This guy looks pretty intimidating, but don't worry, it's just our iguana from the entrance plaza. This guy is a lot bigger, and it's him and his friends that we're going to be adding into the zoo today. So, back in the Amazonia area that we started last week, we built habitats on one side of the river, and today we're going to build two habitats on the other side of the river. So, as you look at it here, we've got a lot of work to get done. On the left-hand side, we're going to build a habitat for the spectacled caiman. On the right-hand side that you can see here, we're going to build a habitat for Cuvier's dwarf caiman. And then in the middle, to join them all up, we're going to build a huge waterfall that flows into the river and hides the capuchin shelter at the back. Let's get building. We're going to start in the middle in between the two habitats and build a big waterfall that is going to set the scene, join the two habitat areas together, and just provide a nice focal point as the guests are walking down the path along the river. So we're going to be using a mixture of the fake rocks and some of Zoov's mud walls that we used last week, and it's also going to cover up the fairly plain wall where the capuchin shelter is. So as well as the rocks and the mud walls, which are going to be in the finished waterfall, we're also going to be using some of the plaster pieces that are on the grid. The reason for that is when we put the special effects water pieces in, like we're doing here, if we group them in with the plaster, that means we get them at exactly the right angle, and it's really easy to put them into exactly the place that you want to. If you start trying to place them on the rocks themselves, they're going to be at all kinds of crazy angles and facing in the wrong direction, and it just takes forever. So we'll do it on this plaster, and then later on we can delete the plaster and all the water will be perfect and the build will look exactly the way that we want it. We're going to use one of the sort of pre-made waterfall pieces for the bottom level, which is going to be completely covered up, and that gives us a nice sort of space of water at the bottom. And then for the top part of it, which we're just starting here, we're going to use the special effects water pieces entirely because they're a lot bigger and a lot more impressive looking. And with this little plaster sort of piece that I've built here, that's going to enable us to put the special effects pieces onto it really easily and get them looking absolutely perfect. So we start with some of the bottom pieces to get some rushing water down here on the second level of the waterfall. Once we've got those in the right place, we'll put some of the mid pieces in, which is where we get the really big rushing water. Make sure you don't have them like exactly in line with each other and you get a more natural look. And then we'll put some of the top pieces in and get that sort of frothy water at the top to give it a really good sense of scale. We'll delete the plaster piece, and now we can select everything and move it back into the wall so that it sits in nicely with the mud walls. And then we'll put some final, I think they're more river rapids pieces, these, at the top, so it looks like it's actually coming out of the rocks, like that's where the water's being pumped from. And then we'll put a load of the smaller fake rocks in around the base to give it a more naturalistic kind of look. Loads of these in. I love these pieces. When you sink them in a bit, you can get some really subtle effects with these. And with random rotation turned on, it looks really natural as well. So just keep putting these in basically until I'm happy with the final look of it. And just a few more down at the bottom. And then we'll take a look at the finished waterfall and make sure that we're happy with it. Needs a few more rocks around the side and maybe some plants for interest. There we go. I really like that. I think that's pretty impressive. That goes into the river nicely. And now we can get started with the first of the caiman habitats. So we're going to go with some terrain painting first of all. The Amazon has kind of sandy riverbanks. That's one of the sort of defining features of it. So what I'm going to do is cover the whole thing with sand first of all, using the rougher sand rather than the sort of perfect beach kind of sand. And then we'll make the brush smaller and go in and do some detail with the mud. That's only slightly different from the sand texture, so that enables you to paint some details in and stop it just being one big kind of block of colour. And then we'll go in with the heavy mud tool and start putting that around these brown rocks so that they sit into the sand and just makes it look a lot more natural and a lot more interesting. Most of this is going to be covered up with plants in the end, but you want to make sure you've got a good base to work from before you start putting the plants in. Next up, we're going to use an amazing workshop item by my good friend Romano Palacios. You've seen his work on my channel before. This is a huge mangrove tree that he made. You can get it on the workshop. I'll put a link in the description. It is so much bigger and so much more impressive than the in-game mangrove trees. He must have built this with about, I don't know, like 100 trees. They're all upside down below the terrain, which is where the mangrove roots come from. It looks amazing. We'll be using a load of those in this habitat to give it an Amazonian kind of feel. And then we're going to separate the two habitats with glass, so it's a really subtle divide. I have seen Cuvier's dwarf caiman and spectacle caiman kept together before, and we actually did that in our wetland zoo, but this time I want them to have their own separate habitat because we've got a lot of river to fill here, and I want people to have different animals to see on either side of them. So we get that final effect we're going for with capybara to your left, two different kinds of caiman to your right, and then the capuchins up in the air. We'll do the same thing we did on the other side of the river with some concrete to line the underside of the path and make it so that the caimans can't swim into the capybara and eat all the little babies we've just had. And then we'll start planting up. So again, putting loads of the scaevola bushes around the edge of the habitat and sort of covering them with the rocks so that they look like they're just growing around the margins. I really like that look. And you can see how impressive these mangroves look with those huge roots just going over the wall, into the waterfall, down into the river. Such an amazing workshop item. Then we'll get some reeds in, all sorts of different plants, and get that sort of overgrown Amazon kind of feel that we want. We'll put some of these plants in as well. And then we'll get some of the giant rhubarb in. This is one of my favorite plants in the game. It's so big, the leaves look great. And if you position it so you can't really see the rhubarb part of it, it makes a really nice sort of generic jungly looking plant. I think they grow in the Amazon, I'm not 100% sure, but I've definitely seen them in zoos because they're so big and so impressive. They're definitely worth using. We're going to build up a load of layers here. So you've got the reeds in the foreground and the mangrove, then you've got rhubarb behind that, then you've got some larger trees behind that, and then we're going to have some palms and more rhubarb actually behind the habitat, so that we just get this really sort of enclosed feel. Then we're going to put in one of the mud wallow enrichments. You've seen me cover these up loads of times, so I'm just going to show you the end of it because I don't think I've done this before, and I really like using this piece, which is the aquatic faux rock steps. They give you a really kind of ancient, decrepit kind of feel to the rockwork, which I think is really effective if you position it correctly. And yeah, I really like how this one looks when I finish with it, especially with all the aquatic rocks as well. I think this is one of my favorites sort of uses of this enrichment item. I'm not trying to like hide it this time, more make it look more interesting than the sort of hexagonal wood effect that you normally get. And that's the basic part of this habitat done. We'll just make sure these rocks are in exactly the right place. That one is a little bit squiff. Let's move that. And then let's take a look at the habitat and see how it's shaping up. Looking good. Looking very jungly. Let's add some final details. We'll put some scum marks on the glass where the water is sitting and the dirt that will always accumulate there, especially with it being inside the habitat. It's not going to get cleaned like daily or anything like that, so you will get a bit of a scum mark here. We'll change the color so it sits in nicely. And then something I've been doing a lot of over the past day or so is mixing this strangler fig piece in with the mud rocks. It looks absolutely amazing when you get it right. Gives you a really interesting texture, more interesting than just having the mud rocks on its own. So I've been putting this all over the habitats in this area. And that's the Cuvier's dwarf caiman habitat pretty much done. We're going to move on and take care of the spectacled caiman, but first, it's time for some more franchise tips. Today's tip is how to correctly size your habitats for franchise mode, which is really important. Let's say you want a capybara habitat. You've looked at the Zoopedia, you've seen what sort of social group they live in, and you want to build a habitat for 4 adults, and you're going to allow room for 12 juveniles, which is eminently possible with 3 females in there. So the Zoopedia is telling you you need 717 meters of land and 178 meters of water to keep these guys happy. So how do we work it out? What we need is a calculator. What we're going to do is take 717 and add 178, and that gives us 895 square meters that we need to keep our animals happy. Now we're going to use our secret weapon, the square root button. If we hit that, it tells us that if we build a square habitat where each wall is 29.91 meters long, we're going to have enough space for our animals. We'll build a square using the Arctic wood pieces because they're the cheapest wall piece. Each one is 4 meters long, as you know. So we'll put these in 4, 8, 12, 16, 20, 24, 28, 32, and I always do one more for luck so we can put some rocks and trees in. We'll go with one more there. We've got 36 meters long. We'll do it again up here, same length, and then once we've got 2 sides in, you can just select the whole thing, duplicate it with Control D, hit Z a couple of times, spin it round, and then there we have a square habitat that is definitely going to be big enough for our animals. So the other side of the river that we built last week is looking really, really nice. I'm very happy with how this turned out, and I want to make sure that the other side of the river with the caimans on it has that same continuity and looks like one big habitat. So the way I'm going to achieve that is by blueprinting the dwarf caiman habitat and then copying it across to where we want the spectacled caiman to be, getting it in the right position, there we go, and making loads of little adjustments here and there so everything is in a different place but it still looks like it's part of the same river. Time for the finishing touches. I'm going to put a load more trees and plants at the back to block out the view outside of this area because we want all the areas to feel like their own little worlds. I've put some fish from the workshop in the river, and now it's time to go to Tekton Zoo and grab the first of our caimans. Now, we don't have any spectacled caimans at Tekton Zoo, but we do have dwarf caimans. They had babies recently. Well, not that recently. They take a long time to grow, and I have saved the best of the males. He's going to be the first caiman into San Bernardino Zoo, and then we will buy another dwarf caiman and 3 spectacled caimans. Let's take a look at the finished build. This is the waterfall. I think it makes a really impressive centerpiece to the area, and it looks really lush with all the plant life that is around it. I just really like the way this looks, and it completely covers up the capuchin habitat, which is perfect. And here are the spectacled caimans. I really like these guys. These are one of my favorite crocodilians in the game. I think they're the most recent, if I'm correct. And the model is just so good. There's so much detail, and they just look really cool swimming around in this naturalistic habitat that we've made for them. You can see a little capuchin running across the top there as well, which is great. And here's the dwarf caimans. These are so interesting. I saw the tail of one once in a zoo. That's the closest I've ever got to actually seeing one properly. Hopefully one day I will do. And then we've got an overview of the whole area going from the mixed capybara and capuchin habitat over the guest path and then into the central area where the capuchins run around, leading up to their shelter just behind the waterfall here. And if we get a guest eye view across the whole area, I'm really happy with how it hangs together. I think it's very effective. I like the glass dividers, which are really subtle. Just keep the animals away from each other without spoiling the view of the river. This is where we started today, and this is where we have ended up. Next week, we're going to put in a big habitat for the giant otters. We're going to have a lot going on in that habitat. I'm kind of scared to start building it, but I'm going to. So I will see you next week. Thank you for watching as always. Bye.